think first of all, okay, again, not only this for this locale, but first of all, know the market is really important. So like in Japanese, we have this hierarchy, different ways to talk to people depending on the hierarchy. If the person is older than you, or like boss, or parents, as opposed to younger than you, or subordinate and all the thing. But in English, especially if you're translating Japanese into English, in American culture we don't really have that. So we have to understand the difference first of all, and then think about if that nuance in Japanese is really important. We really have to localize that much. We really have to put that much effort to translate or localize into English, because sometimes all these kind of differences could be ignored because that's not the point in a show or in the movie. So yeah, to understand both, the difference between both cultures is maybe the most important thing that you have to understand as a localizer.
Yeah, something I thought of was when it comes to machine translation between Japanese and English, in Japanese, you very rarely, you don't need a subject of a sentence as often. So like when we say like, are you going to the store? Are you, like, you always have that you or I or something. In Japanese, you can omit the subject a lot of times because it's just implied by context.
Yeah.
So when you use machine translation, like that's becoming a big thing that a lot of people use in their workflows. When you translate the English into Japanese, the machine will just automatically add the subject with the English because English requires a subject most of the time. So you'll end up with this extra subject in the Japanese that might sound a little bit unnatural because you can just omit it, since Japanese usually omits the subject. So just being aware of linguistic things like that is very important when you're just to be aware that that exists, and you need to make sure that you're not like including anata for you in a lot of the translations, because that doesn't sound quite natural most of the time.
Yeah, that's a good point actually. Not only for machine translation, but translators have to understand the content. Like, yeah, like in Japanese it says like ikuyo, that means like going, but you don't know we're going or let's go or I'm going or you're going or stuff like that. So yeah, translators really have to understand the context, and then yeah, understand the context is the base thing. Otherwise, they can't translate into English because you need a subject. It's ambiguous language. Japanese is like you as a listener. It almost feels like you as a listener or reader, if that was a book, has a responsibility to understand. Has a responsibility to to guess who is doer. And that's not difficult for me because I'm a native Japanese speaker. But I can assume that for Japanese learners, I think it's extremely difficult because it's just like, it is what it is kind of thing. I can't explain sometimes because I'm a native speaker of the rules and everything, but
Yeah, and then when the machine has to take a Japanese sentence without a subject and put it into English, it has to add a subject in the English, and it just kind of has to guess, and it will guess wrong a lot of the time.
That's right.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just ask the question first, does the keigo have importance? Like, how important is it that we know that they spoke in keigo versus normal polite speech or casual speech? Does that have an impact on what happened, the plot of the movie? Like, for example, if there's a scene where there's a character who intentionally uses casual speech to his boss instead of using keigo, and the boss is like insulted because of that, like that's very important. You need to make sure you're careful when you're translating that. But for the most part, keigo, if it doesn't have a direct impact on the plot like that, there's not really that too much stuff you can do to get that into English. Like you can maybe just omit some you would write out a contraction instead, and make sure you're using like more formal sounding words, but it doesn't matter too much, I feel like, a lot of the time.
Right. Yeah. I think he's right. Maybe we can use formal words versus maybe lots of slangs, so that the register of it. But because American English, there's no keigo in English, so I don't think even audience care so much about it. So most of the time you can maybe ignore. But then I just remembered, you remember Squid Game? That's from Korea, but they also have keigo and stuff.
Yeah.
And lots of Korean speakers who watch the movie on, TV series on Netflix, lots of Korean speakers who understand English, they said their English subtitle is so wrong because keigo was not reflected. But at the time I thought that was like, well, that's not really a big deal. But then again, nuance maybe. Maybe you really have to be careful about it because like he said, sometimes maybe they intentionally speak super rude to the old people. Older person to the person, speaker. That's really rude. And then like just only one sentence or even one word that speaker says to the person, you would understand the nuance of it. Oh, this person is so rude. Oh, this person is so, there's a huge respect going on. So I think it's kind of important. Maybe sometimes really, really important. Yeah. And then I think that's the, everybody who do this, who does the same job as we are, like Japanese English localizer, I think it's our ultimate goal, to what to do with it. I think we're still on this, progress, on process to be a perfect localizer, because I don't think there's like concrete standard per se for that field.
One example that I always like to tell people is there's a huge cultural aspect in addition to just the language when it comes to localization. So, for example, the movie Inside Out, the Pixar movie Inside Out, there's a scene near the beginning of the movie where the main character, Riley, is just a little kid and she's being forced to eat her broccoli. Mm-hmm. And that's the English American version. But in the Japanese version, kids actually like broccoli. Mm-hmm. So, that nuance of like you're being forced to eat your broccoli, like that kind of hatred that kids have for broccoli, that isn't a thing in Japan. So they actually went in and they changed the visuals in that scene. They changed the broccoli to bell peppers, because bell peppers in Japan, that is like the broccoli of America for Japanese kids. They hate bell peppers, and so Riley eating that bell pepper in Japan, that carries across that same nuance. So it was really cool for me to learn there's an entire industry behind, adapting the culture and the language, and that's part of the reason why I really love localization.
Yeah, that's a great point. All these kind of things. So I am a translator and I have experience being a translator for 5-6 years, so I could say I'm an experienced translator, but before I started this being a translator, I didn't know the localization and translation, and now that I know localization is not only translation, that in a localization field you have to actually change things like Kyle said as an example. So it's kind of really cool.
Culturally, I guess something specific to Japanese that really Japan and Japanese that interested me was when it comes to designing websites. American websites, a lot of the advertising kind of focuses on visual stuff, catching your eye, the overall just seeing, catching viewers' eyes so that they'll be more likely to scroll through the page and stuff. Whereas Japanese websites, a lot of them will be very lots of text just all across the page, because Japanese people tend to want to read a lot more to make sure they know all the details of something before they purchase. So if you look at the Yahoo website, the design is completely different in the American versus the Japanese Yahoo. The American one is very visual, there's pictures, and if the Japanese one though, there's just so much text, and a lot of Americans would look at that and be like, this looks like it's from 2000, this is so outdated. But no, it's really just a cultural thing. If you try to make the American website if you try to just directly take that design and put it in Japan and just put Japanese text in there, you wouldn't get the same kind of viewership as you would in America, because the way that Japanese people look at websites is different than in America.
When I was a teenager, I was watching this movie that was about American college kids, and they're talking about prom, and they're talking about the sorority, yeah, kind of thing. And that was just translated on a subtitle, saying like, hey, let's go to prom. And like, we don't know what prom is in Japan, so that even that was in Japanese, you know, that's literally the translation of let's go to prom, but we don't know what prom is. So that was kind of confusing. But then at the same time, that opened my mind to kind of, well, there was no Google when I was younger, but like when I was, you know, I was like asking my friends from, you know, Western culture or like, you know, English teacher. So that, oh my gosh, maybe it's not answering your question, but that lack of like perfect localization could open somebody's door to more interested in the culture. And, you know, the person is more aggressively checking or searching or Googling in this, you know, time.
Something else that I tend to notice is the like TV commercials for like American audiences versus Japanese audiences. The Japanese commercials, TV commercials, they tend to have a lot of like geinoujin, like celebrities and well-known figures. And that is kind of like the main focus of the commercial, where even if it's like a McDonald's commercial, like I just saw this like a few weeks ago, in America you focus on like the juicy burger and like just, you know, getting, you know, visually getting the viewer to look at it and be like, that looks so good. But there was a Japanese McDonald's commercial, and instead of being more on the visuals, it was more on they invited two very well-known actresses to kind of like do this little thing together, and there was a lot of shots of like the actresses' faces, like, and it was more on them rather than the burgers, which I thought was really interesting because, yeah, in like American culture, it's kind of changed recently, but when like celebrities come on to advertise a product, like some people are like, wow, they're selling out, like that's so dumb, like why is this celebrity just like selling out for this product, and it's kind of looked down upon, but like that's the norm in Japanese commercials, where you need to get like a well-known figure to kind of draw attention to the commercial.
About the crown, you know, ... thing.
Yeah.
That might have been, I mean, because I don't watch anime, right? That kind of things are difficult for even us to understand as Japanese speakers, because we don't know the anime culture. And anime creators, they don't care about us. They don't care about Japanese who don't understand anime culture. That mean is, you know, so like Japanese anime translated and localized into American English. I don't know how much they have to do, because the anime culture is like right there. You know, you just kind of have to understand. If you know, you know, kind of basis.
Yeah.
As opposed to, you know, TV drama, TV shows, that's for everybody. So I think localizing anime or game is a little bit different, if you know what I mean. I think to understand the context of the video or movie, footnote is maybe important, but that has to be super short. And when it comes to, for example, if the movie is about like war or history or something really, serious, you don't want to put the footnote about something that's not so important. For example, I don't know, like about food or, you know, all the kind of thing is unnecessary. I don't know if they do it or not, because I don't really watch so much TV shows and movie about that kind of genre, but yeah, I think that's something that localizers have to think about, if it's necessary or not.
I have not watched very many like official like translations of Japanese shows or movies, so I also can't really say if that's very common, but I can say that in the fan subtitling world, there's a lot of that kind of thing where they just give like footnotes for explanations of certain words they're using, and there's actually like some notorious culture around like the fan subtitlers just kind of add so much detail. Like they'll have like a 3-line long footnote and it's like impossible to read it in the time without pausing. But I think it's because like those fan subtitlers, like you can tell they're so passionate about doing this work and they do it for free for the most part, and so like they just want to get across like this cultural thing is so cool and I want to be able to transmit it to the world. So that's why they write those. But I think in a real situation, with a professional situation, when you're making it for the general audiences, you need to make sure that you take into account like how easy it is to parse everything. So you probably want to avoid those when possible, when it's not too important, or if you do include the footnotes, you can have something really short. Like for example, Reiwa is the name of the current era in Japan, and it's 2019 to the present, so you could just have like a short footnote being like Reiwa 2019 to present. So just gotta keep track of that.
Instead of that, they just have like a celebrity dancing a lot with like with super super how do you say, energetic music, background music, and they just kept dancing, and lots of like
like animation. And at the end, you were like, what are they selling? What are they advertising?
What are they selling exactly? Daily C.
Was it really? Yeah. That's Japan. Right, that's true.